Army veteran John Powers helped revolutionize the Army's energy program and is now financing clean energy with his company, CleanCapital. Up next on Veteran on the Move.
Welcome to Veteran on the Move. If you're a veteran in transition, an entrepreneur wannabe, or someone still stuck in that JOB trying to escape, this podcast is dedicated to your success. And now, your host, Joe Crane.
This episode of Veteran on the Move is brought to you by SkillShare. SkillShare is an online learning community with over 18,000 classes in business, entrepreneurship, design, technology, and more. Veteran on the Move listeners can get 2 months of Skillshare Premium for just 99 cents. To sign up, go to veteranonthemove.com/Skillshare. All right, today we're talking with John Powers. John, welcome to Veteran on the Move with CleanCapital. We're looking forward to hearing all about what you're doing, great things with CleanCapital. Before we do that, can you take us back and tell us how you got started and what you're doing in the Army?
Yeah, first of all, Joe, thanks so much for having me on. So I was a ROTC cadet back before 9/11. Went to John Carroll University. Coming out of high school, had a ROTC scholarship, and went in the military in basically 2000, right after graduation. Was an artillery officer. Went down to lovely Lawton, Oklahoma for my officer basic, and then was sent over to Germany and became part of the 1st Armored Division. Spent upwards of just over 4 years over there, but that included a tour in both Baghdad and Najaf as part of OIF 1. We went in May of 2003 into Baghdad, and we were stationed in an area called Adamiyah. Matter of fact, remember when the soldiers were the people of the year for Time magazine back then?
Yeah.
Those are 3 soldiers in our unit. So we were in this very the most hostile sector of Baghdad in 0304, living in one of Uday Hussein's palaces, and then we were extended and sent down to Najaf to when sort of Muqtada al-Sadr began his uprising, and stayed for a few extra months after that. And after that, I was a captain. I had sort of had the choice of career course or staying there longer. I actually chose to stay a little longer in theater, and then got out after Iraq. I was actually an elementary education major before I went in the Army. Thought I was going to go back to teach, and ended up moving back to Buffalo, New York, where I'm from. Transitioned with really no plan other than just trying to figure out what I was going to do. And at the time, I'd say that there wasn't much of a transition program. We literally landed in Germany, had gone to a theater on the base. They basically said, if anyone's having any post-traumatic stress disorder, please stand up and come to the front of the theater, right? Which no one would do. And then that was it. I mean, I basically got a bunch of papers signed and moved back to the United States. I got lucky though. There was this documentary that was made about our unit called Gunner Palace, and it was sort of the first movie to come out about the war. The filmmaker is a guy named Mike Tucker, who literally lived with us in Baghdad, and he was really intimately integrated with the unit. It wasn't where he was sort of signed off by the Army to be there. He'd shown up at our door, and our battalion commander had invited him in. And basically, I had gone from being a platoon leader at that point to being the battalion S1, sort of the administration guy for the commander. So I worked really closely with Mike, got to know him well. He invited me up to the Toronto Film Festival, which is about 2 hours from my hometown in Buffalo. I never knew anything about the film industry, but it turns out that's like the second largest film festival in the world. This documentary premieres, and afterwards they asked us to come on stage and sort of be part of the panel conversation, which I had never done before, and was part of that conversation. And there was another screening the next day, and the next thing you know, we're getting taken to the Diesel Jeans store to get Diesel Jeans to go to the Diesel Jean party that night, and there's vodka, ice flowing everywhere, and you name it. It was just like everything you imagine in Hollywood. And I'm like 2 weeks out of Baghdad, and the next thing I know, I'm like walking around with a bunch of movie stars in Toronto. Total culture shock.
Oh yeah.
And I was, ready to go back to the University of Buffalo to get a master's in school administration. And the film company said, "Hey, we want you to go on tour with this movie." And I had a decision to make, either grad school or a movie tour. And I chose a movie tour. And it was completely changed my life. I spent the better part of 6 or 8 weeks. We did 23 cities, which included everything from military bases to, the Miami Film Festival to, doing a screening on Capitol Hill. And, all of a sudden I'm traveling around the country talking about my experience and just meeting others, right, that had been there, right, and sharing that. And we actually did the screening. The first screening we did was for one of the soldiers in our unit who's killed his parents. And so it was like this really holistic healing, maybe the wrong term, but just full circle opportunity, right, where I really began to understand what my experience was. And at the end of that, instead of going home to teach, which is what I intended to do, I ended up starting a nonprofit and went back to Baghdad and spent 2 years trying to keep 16 to 25-year-olds from being recruited into extremist groups, which is the whole reason we have ISIS today. It's because we were not able to do what we needed to do to stop that. I won't go down that path, but that's something that, I was pretty passionate about working on, trying to get government support for and programs for. We were spending, $4 billion in reconstruction, but nothing to engage this huge youth population that were now out of school. And, I think the beginning of ISIS at that time. Sorry, this is a long story, but basically because of that experience, I was getting really frustrated at the lack of leadership I was seeing in Washington, and ended up running for Congress in 2008, back in my hometown of Buffalo. Came really close. It was a great life. I would say the two most defining experiences of my life were, one, being in Iraq, and 2, running for Congress, because you really got in people's living rooms. You heard their stories. I was 29 at the time, right? And it was a bit of a long shot, but we got really close. And I'm glad I did it. It was a great experience. But I also, when I was finished, knew I didn't want to just stay purely in the national security realm, because I was really interested in the clean energy space because of my time in Iraq, but it's just something I hadn't really pursued. And when I moved back to Washington, I started focusing on clean energy, started a program at a think tank in Washington, focused on energy and climate change and national security, which led, I was doing a lot of writing on what the military should do in this space, because they're a huge energy consumer, and ended up getting asked to come in. I became the Army's first special advisor on energy and helped stand up those programs. Went from there. I served under President Obama as the chief sustainability officer for the federal government, working across all the different verticals in the government, helping to drive renewable energy, energy efficiency, and electric vehicles, and all these different programs. And then, in that work, met my now partners, and started CleanCapital after I got out.
So give me an example of clean energy.
Give you an example of clean energy?
Yeah.
Yeah. So well, first of all, there's a ton there. So what we were looking at is, okay, the idea of decentralized, localized power, right, is what really brings national security. So if you have these huge coal plants or natural gas plants, which we have, right, and we've got wires that run, hundreds of miles transferring that electricity. It's a 20th century structure. It's pretty stabilized, right? The grid was the grid was the group of engineers called it the greatest invention of the 20th century, and it was. I mean, it's basically what got us to where we are. But because of progression in technology, right now we can have, for instance, solar panels on the roof of a data center providing power into that data center. You can have fuel cells on site, helping to provide power to that system. Microgrid into energy efficiency and other type of holistic ways to look at power on that site. So clean energy as a whole right? There's multiple different definitions of it, but basically it's about, reducing the carbon emissions out of traditional fossil fuel energy. And we're seeing that explode nationwide. Google's going to achieve their goal of 100% renewable energy in their operations this year. Apple, eBay, you name it, the big tech companies are doing this hand over foot. Walmart is going 100% renewable energy right now. And it's not all for sort of, it's not all about being green from an environmental standpoint. They're doing it because it allows them to budget their energy consumption and actually better manage their systems, and in many cases save money, right? So when I was at the Army, we put in place a renewable energy goal. They just signed a huge deal down in Fort Hood that over the course of this 20-year contract is going to save them literally tens of millions of dollars by putting in place these clean energy projects.
Well, a few episodes back, we were talking with Nick Hawks, who had a similar interest for a while. There's also a tactical advantage to it. For example, in Iraq, Afghanistan, every base, every FOB has its own power because of diesel generators.
Exactly.
But what do you got to put in the diesel generators? Diesel fuel.
Right.
So you have massive amounts of tanker trucks all up and down the roads and highways going from point A to point B, supplying diesel fuel to these massive bases every day. And that, the logistics train that was forced to be out on the roads and highways, those were the ones that they were blowing up with IEDs all the time or if you had to have 6 water trucks coming through the front gate every day, bringing fresh water, that was a potential threat, a potential entry point. So if you had water purification, if each place had its own sustainable water purification and that kind of thing going on, it reduces the logistical requirement to that base or that FOB or that location, which helps tactically. You're not having to put guys out on the roads supplying these places.
Yeah. I mean, Joe, what caught my interest in the space to begin with was we had, a set of fuel trucks like every base did. And we had a group of Iraqis that worked on the base with us, whether it be, running the phone booths or cooking, right? And every day when they leave, right, if they left at 6 o'clock, by 6:30 or 6:45, we were getting mortar rounds wherever those fuel trucks were. So we literally had to move them, right, after our locals left. And that was the first time I began to understand the issue. And then you just outlined, I think a lot of veterans have seen it firsthand, the amount of resources we were putting into protecting our convoys. And when I worked on this issue at the Pentagon and we really began to study the data, there was so much to be had in the fact that, I think 75 to 80%, I think the numbers are, of our convoys are for fuel and water. And so the amount of resources we were spending on that and protecting that, and the Marines did an amazing thing. They deployed solar powered generators, not in testing, for an entire brigade or battalion, and ended up expanding it because it was becoming such a successful thing. One, they ran quieter. Two, you didn't have to fuel. They could be fueled if necessary. They didn't have to fuel them as much. And once they saw the operational impact of it, it just made sense, right? Yeah.
One little interesting tidbit. I know that those things, these massive diesel generators, they're about the size of a Connex box. They held a lot of diesel fuel. They'd run for a long time, like days on end. But for some reason, our support guys did great. They had a lot of work to do, but for some reason they could never, like, instead of coming around and refueling it when it was half empty so that it always continued to run, they knew that it needed to be refueled when it ran out of fuel.
Right.
Everything would shut down for an hour or two, and you call her like, man, we need more diesel fuel, and then they'd come out, fill it back up, start her back up, and off for running. I'm like, why can't you just fill it up like when it gets about halfway down or when it's still got a quarter tank? No, when it's empty,
on top
we
of that,
can fill
the
it
Corps
up.
of Engineers recognize like that weakness, right? And these things run your efficiency level almost like an engine, right? You want it to be running 100% efficient. Like you're making the most of the electrons you're producing.
Mm-hmm.
But these things were running at like 15 or 20% efficiency because every tent would have its own generator providing power to the air conditioners, right, or whatever.
Yeah.
Total waste of power and fuel. So they started to microgrid these things, basically wire these things together so that you could have one running multiple tents, for instance, right? And those type of efficiencies drove over time, and the military's learned a lot from that, and now putting those into future operating bases, which is exciting. I mean, that's what they should be doing, and I think you're seeing a significant influx of veterans into the clean energy space. The solar industry, I think, there's a recent study out from the Solar Foundation, but I think it has like 40% more veterans in their workforce than like any other industry, because guys are coming back and getting into it. And every one of every 50 jobs last year in the United States was a solar energy job. It's the second largest growing job market in the country.
Is solar energy? I mean, I was always fascinated with solar energy as a kid. I was always playing with solar panels and wanting to, incorporate that kind of thing. But I guess kind of the concept for me, it was more a concept. It wasn't, I want to save the earth. It was more a concept of, I just like the idea of producing energy out of thin air, which is essentially what you're doing. The living off the grid concept was what was fascinating to me. Wind power, solar energy, those kinds of things, geothermal. I was always fascinated with all those different options. But the biggest problem with all that stuff has always been, well, one, it's hugely a massive amount of cost up front. And second, it's the efficiency of it. Or you could have a whole roof, 20, 30 years ago, you could have a whole roof full of solar panels and charging batteries, and it still wasn't enough to really keep the house, just one house going by itself. But the solar panels have gotten more efficient. So where are we at right now as far as solar panels per se, and even wind generators, if you know about it?
Yeah,
absolutely. Is it to a point where it's realistic?
Not only realistic, it's growing hand over fist right now. I think for a couple of different reasons. One revolves around cost point, right? So you think about when things were getting started, you had a couple of manufacturers. The industry wasn't very efficient, not just in the output of the power, but actually in getting these things installed and financed, right? So they were very unique projects. And forget it for a second, home. Think about like commercial industrial, right? So running warehouses and others. So one, the efficiency of these panels have improved. Two, there's a lot more manufacturers out there, so the costs of these have come down significantly. We actually at cleancapital.com, you can go to our blog, and we've got things outlining how those you can parallel the cost reduction in those panels to the skyrocketing of growth. Like for instance, there was more clean energy or more renewable solar power put on the grid, meaning brought into existence in Q1 of last year than in sort of all forward-looking quarters combined. I mean, it's just the growth is phenomenal, and it's skyrocketing because of those costs and because it's becoming an efficient industry, right? People know how to put it in. They know how to operate it. People know how to finance it, which is a big part of it, which is what we do at Clean Capital. But it's so most companies don't want to put the upfront money into building this, right? So what they do is they say, I'll go back to Walmart for a second. Say you're Walmart, you lease out your rooftop to Joe's solar company, right? Joe comes in, builds it, and then sells you the electrons off of that system under a contract that could last up to 20 years, sometimes even more. Right. So Walmart says, okay, I'm going to buy whatever comes off of that for the next 20 years. Now, granted, it won't power the entire store, but it could power a significant portion of it. Right. Yeah. And it's not going to power the lights at night, for instance. Right. Mm-hmm. But it can power a good portion of their what's called peak load, maybe even their air conditioning or whatever. Then Joe turns around to the market and says, okay, I have a contract with Walmart and a place to put these things, and I know how to build them. And then people like us will come in and finance that. Right. And basically you've got almost like a real estate transaction in place now with Walmart, who's going to be paying the bill for the next 20 years, right? And investors who are interested in those long-term payment streams. So, we and many others are doing it, are financing projects like that. And as more money comes to that market, it brings down the cost of that money, meaning you can get it much more efficiently. And as a result, solar is sort of happening all over the country, not all over the country, many key areas right now and growing. It's of course still a pretty regulated space, but that's just because electricity is regulated in general. But the biggest transformation you're seeing, and it is a huge disruption to the traditional way energy has been produced, is to draw a parallel to cell phones, right? If you went back to the 90s, everyone had a landline. You had the Ma Bells of the world in place, right? And you picked up the line and it went through to whoever you're calling the other end. What they did is they put in place certain policies at a federal level, disrupted that, and it allowed people to start to compete. It allowed new technologies to come forward. Folks like Apple and whoever else to produce the smartphones we have today, but it puts your phone right in your pocket, right? You're seeing that happen in power now. Electricity is no longer going to be this purely centralized system where you're going to have customers producing their own on-site electricity. And many of them do it because it's important to their operations, right? Like FedEx, think about FedEx shipping for the holidays, right?
Mm-hmm.
If the power went down at one of their facilities because the grid went out, right? They'd be in trouble. So they want to ensure they can have the critical power they need to operate. And of course, you can flash that simply forward to the military and the stuff that many of these bases are doing to ensure, the operations aren't all overseas, right? They're flying UAVs out of places in Nevada, right? They have communications, cybersecurity things, and data centers all over the country. So how do we ensure those things are powered and functioning?
Hey, John, I want to talk more about this when we get back. SkillShare is an online learning community with over 18,000 classes in business, entrepreneurship, design, technology, and more. You can take classes in social media marketing, data analytics, brand strategy, productivity, and time management. You name it, they've got it. You want to explore your creative side? They've got classes in photography, illustration, and writing as well. So whether you're trying to start a side hustle or a new business, deepen your professional skill set, or just explore a new passion, SkillShare is there to keep you learning and thriving. In the military, technical and tactical proficiency is a must and requires constant learning and training. In business, lifelong learning is important to any entrepreneur to stay up with the trends and latest tools of your trade. You can join SkillShare today with a special offer just for my listeners. Get 2 months of SkillShare Premium for just 99 cents. That's right. SkillShare is offering Veteran on the Move listeners 2 months of unlimited access to over 18,000 classes for just 99 cents. To sign up, go to veteranonthemove.com/Skillshare. Again, go to veteranonthemove.com/Skillshare to start your 2 months now. All right, back talking with Army veteran John Powers from CleanCapital. So you're essentially, John, you've been financing. What CleanCapital does is, because an issue with financing, for example, a solar panel project, in the past, the person who wants to put it up would have to go find the money or the loan or the bank loan or bankroll it themselves. You saw a lot of problems with clean energy financing, so you guys started your own company, CleanCapital. And one of the things you do, well, I'm assuming an example of a deal you guys might do is what you talked about earlier with the Walmart deal. You might have Joe's solar panel company strikes a deal with Walmart. Walmart doesn't want to fund the solar panels, but they'll let somebody use the roof space on top of their Walmart to put up solar panels. And Joe's comes in, needs the financing to put the solar panels in, strikes a deal on the cost of electricity that Walmart's going to buy from them. Then they go and they use that leverage to actually go out and get financing for the project. Is that essentially how it's working?
Yeah, essentially. One caveat to this: what we'll do is go into Joe, who will put that all in place, and just really buy him and the whole system out, right? And then we actually step in the shoes and operate it. Now, not everyone does that. That's just the way CleanCapital works. And to step back for a second, like what I saw, and I think my partner saw, is there was a lot of inefficiency in the clean energy market on this financing side. So I was actually working on these issues from a policy perspective at the White House trying to find ways of bringing more money to bear to the space. And actually a guy who I served in Iraq with introduced me to his brother-in-law, who was the general counsel at a private equity firm in New York, my now partner, Tom. Tom and I were having beers and lamenting about these inefficiencies. And he said, look, I just refinanced my law school loans on this platform called SoFi.com, which is a pretty famous fintech platform. You'll see Super Bowl ads for it and everything else. He's like, why can't we do this type of efficiency for clean energy? And so we took that mission on while we had day jobs and started to develop the idea. And then, people got immediately what we were doing. Folks that knew the space because they knew that these inefficiencies existed. And so we went and raised capital to launch the company. So we raised what was known as a seed round to launch the company. Basically, we all have multiple kids, so we had to be able to pay ourselves something and get this thing going. And that was in December 2005. We did our first transaction, which was $20 million of projects, similar to that Walmart one. It was actually, Walmart wasn't in there, but big Fortune 100s, universities, school systems, elementary schools that had solar projects, right, are in that bundle. Mm-hmm. We got it financed. And this year we'll have done, if all goes well here by the end of the year, close to over $50 million in transactions. I have more on the horizon for 2018. And we have a major technology component of what we do, which is about how we underwrite the projects and all that. But in short, what we're doing is financing these things and then owning and operating them for our investors.
So you guys, I'm going to go back to the Walmart example. That's one of that's actually a specific example that you guys are involved in, right?
I would say I wouldn't. We do not own any Walmart ones per se. We are looking at some, but we have Fortune 100s like Walmart.
Okay.
In our portfolio.
So can you go through what kind of specifics can you share on that? So some company wants to put solar panels on its roof to save energy or to produce energy for itself. How does the money flow? How does that work?
So it's pretty simple, actually. So if you are a Fortune 100, right, and you have a warehouse, right, or you've got a big box store, and a lot of big box stores are doing this, you provide access to your system, to your roof, right? Or you could put them on, we have a couple of universities where we have solar arrays over parking lots, right? Which I think makes a ton of sense. Those electrons are plugged into your system somewhere through the electricity system, right? And as the sun provides it, it shoots it out, right? And then basically you can measure exactly what you're producing at a meter. And then you send a bill to that customer who pays you monthly. That gets sent back to a financing pool, right? And they should be blind to the rest of it. Basically, they're paying X amount of money per kilowatt. That gets pooled in with everything else, and then costs that aren't associated with literally like cleaning the bird poop off the solar panels, which it literally is a huge issue, or just maintaining them goes into the financing, and then the more of those you bundle together, the bigger your financing pool, right? Yeah, and you can use that to pay your what's known as debt, right, which is almost like a mortgage in that bundle, or equity, or whoever your investors are, you pay back through that money.
So the overall the advantage to a company that wants you to come in and put solar panels on their roof is that they don't have to fund the initial install or the equipment or anything. They also don't have to manage it, maintain it, fix it, or clean it. Yep. But the advantage they get is they get a discount on their electricity, right?
That's exactly right. I'm sorry, you missed a huge part of this. And so let's take it out of Fortune 100s. This is what I did in the White House.
Okay.
We had the federal government has renewable goals for sure, but they're achieving them by doing these same they're known as power purchase agreements, right? They're saying I will pay X amount of money for electrons. Most of that is hopefully at a discount to what I'm paying today to my utility. And then that allows the developer to come on base or next to the base and build a system and sell them electricity, right? And it's a great way. The Navy had one big project they built in Arizona, or they did a power purchase agreement. They're going to save somewhere around like $230 million over the 20 years. because their electricity bills are over the electricity budget of the federal government is over $4 billion.
Wow.
Right? So there's huge opportunities for savings there.
Yeah. So when you arrange these agreements, do you base it off of because I'm not even sure what a kilowatt hour costs or whatever, depending on where you're at. But if you say, okay, you're going to get 50% off your kilowatt, your electricity bill based on what the power company is charging you today. What happens if the utility company's charges, the rates increase or decrease? Yeah,
that's a good question. So one, it's a constant negotiation, right? So you sort of set until you get to your final numbers, and what we try to do is look at the best data you can on the way the market's going. And if you look at the way the utility costs have been, and unfortunately for a big company that has operations in all 50 states, it's literally 50 different regulatory structures they've got to know, because California is different than Kentucky, which is different than Texas. So it can be really confusing if you're a company, right? But in short, you want to provide that company a reduction on their electricity bill, and then they will you basically built in what's known as an escalator, right, to help inflation. And then, they're saving money off of what is expected to be the growth. Now, if you look at the way utility bills are nationwide, they, for the most part, continue to go up at a pretty levelized pace.
Yeah.
And companies see that savings. And then if they don't, in many cases, you've got to renegotiate them. But we haven't really seen any of that in all of our portfolios. We're seeing sort of what is projected going forward. And places like Hawaii, for instance, right, where they have to literally ship. Hawaii is almost like a forward operating base, right? They don't have any huge generation systems. They have to ship in diesel fuel by the boatload, literally, every day to keep that place running, right? So super expensive cost of electricity, and so solar can be literally pennies on the dollar compared to what they're paying. So it makes economic sense.
Interesting, yeah.
California is an expensive market. The Northeast is an expensive market. But say, for instance, Kentucky has very cheap coal power. It's tough for solar to compete in places like that right now. So it's unfortunately still a state by state thing as it's growing, but the market's very mature. So,
that's interesting. Well, hey John, we're getting close to the end of our time here. Could you give us a little perspective on the startup experience you had with founding CleanCapital? You're one of the co-founders.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, first of all, what many veterans should think about is they have the skill set already, right? I mean, think about deploying into the places we've deployed into. You're running a startup, right? I mean, I was a mayor of a 50,000 person sector of Baghdad when I was 24 years old. Yep. And with an elementary education major, right? I had no idea what I was doing, but you figure it out, right? You figure it out. And a startup's a lot like that. One of my really good friends said this to me the other day, because he's also doing something similar. He said, I feel like every day I wake up and I got an exam and no one told me about it. And I'm like, oh man, I did not prepare for this thing.
That's a great way of putting it.
So you constantly have to be comfortable being uncomfortable, right? And you've got to do things that are, way beyond what, if you think you're going to go to a company and just do X, you're wrong. You're going to end up doing X, Y, and Z. I mean, one day I'm doing, actively involved in an acquisition of a solar asset, and the next minute I'm doing HR stuff, and then I'm out having to raise money, like you're constantly raising money, and then I'm doing interviews, right? It's like this whole wide spectrum, and I love it. I mean, I like going to work every day. I like the team we have. The other thing I'd say why veterans are good at it is it's really mission oriented, right? If you get people on the same, if you care about what you're doing, right? If you're building like a new filter for someone's iPhone Snapchat picture, like I could see that not being so exciting. But if you're doing something that, you think you can change the world with, like it motivates you every day.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, John, thanks for sharing your entrepreneur inspiration, and thanks for relating it to the veterans and current military that are out there listening. If
yeah,
we
Joe, I
wanted,
think one thing for people that want to do it, like there are a lot of resources for veterans interested in doing it, right? Places like Bunker Labs
yes,
in Chicago and Austin and Washington, D.C. are, great venues to go and just learn, like figure out, the skill, figure out what you need to know.
Absolutely. I'm actually coming out. We come across so many great resources that are out there for veterans and even veterans and their families all the time. I've actually created a list of about 40 of them, and I'm going to be coming out with a guidebook just because that's one of the problems with there's so much stuff out there to choose from. Guys don't know where to start or which one to pick or where to go or what this one can do for them. So that's what the purpose of the guidebook is going to be. But in closing, John, thanks for sharing your story. How do we find CleanCapital and what you guys are doing in the clean energy space? How do we look you up?
Yeah, go to cleancapital.com. You can see what we're up to. We actually have a podcast up there if you're interested in learning about energy called Experts Only, and we interview folks across the industry. And you can always find me on LinkedIn too. Look forward to hearing from folks. Awesome.
Well, thanks, John. Appreciate you sharing your story. We look forward to seeing the future success at CleanCapital.
Keep up the good work. Thank you.
All right. These two veterans are Oscar Mike. Hey, after John and I finished up, John told me that you can go to google.com/sunroof and type in your address, and it'll tell you exactly how many hours of usable sunlight per year you have, how much square feet available on your roof for solar panels, the savings over 20 years. You can plug in your current average monthly electric bill. It'll give you recommended solar installation size, tell you what your potential environmental impact is, and how much and what the initial cost of the install of your project or leasing it, and the overall savings you might have. So it's pretty cool. Check it out. That's google.com/sunroof. As you can tell from listening to the Veteran on the Move podcast, interviews are a great way to tell your story and spread the word about your business. If you would like to get booked as a podcast guest, I recommend Interview Valet. You can check out Interview Valet at veteranonthemove.com/valet. Be sure to check out Thrive15.com, the world's premier online education platform that helps entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs learn how to start or grow a successful business. Start your free 30-day membership by going to Thrive15.com and use the promo code VETERAN. Thank you for listening to Veteran on the Move, your pathfinder to freedom. If you like the show, leave us a review on iTunes. Reviews are always greatly appreciated. So until next time, this veteran is Oscar Mike.